The Freedom of Information release covers over 1 million documents, detailing experiments and operations performed by the CIA over the last 50 years. Something of a secret Cold War that happened under the noses of the civilian population. Much of what we're about to show you is not only disturbing, but completely unbelievable.
Case number: Catacombs. Area: sealed away on location in Turkey. Under monitoring by AORD contacts in the embassy. Discovery: the catacombs came to the attention of the division after the estate of Professor was publicly auctioned, and the Federal Archaeology Program placed the winning bid on his journals from the years 19 to 19. These years represented the last years of his field study before retiring. Professor was a fringe figure, known for an obsession with ancient occult practices and historical accounts of anomalies, and was thus a person of interest to the division. Earlier attempts to be clued into any findings he may have made were unsuccessful, as the professor was preternaturally adept at identifying imposters and other more banal forms of deception. On reading the journals, it was learned that his last project was the investigation of an unexplored ruin in the Karapanar Desert. With essentially no qualifying evidence, Professor became convinced that the desertification of the area was due to supernatural pressures, as the surrounding areas are largely fertile. After spending nearly years searching, he indeed discovered a ruin which he described as a tomb not of exaltation but of condemnation, and attributed its obscurity to an effort made by the Hittites to hide its existence. The journals detail the initial pioneering of the labyrinthine burial ground, and a few significant glyphs left on the walls. After this section, the remaining pages of the journal are completely missing, and appear to have been intentionally removed. It is well known that several members of this expedition were said to have fallen ill and died in the Karapanar Desert, and Professor was particularly sensitive about discussing the investigation at all, most especially specific details of the ruin's location and the last days of his associates. It immediately became the intention of the division to find and research these ruins, especially due to the on and off diplomatic relationship between Turkey and Russia, considering the security risk of completing a large-scale operation in Turkey, which at the time had only a loose alliance with the U.S. A small pioneering team was sent in the guise of archaeology students pursuing a capstone project in the mountain range. The intention of the mission was to assess whether or not the case was worth the allocation of resources to a contested ally state, or if a more thorough investigation or acquisition was even warranted at all. The pioneering team was composed of 3 case officers and 3 strike force members functioning as security personnel. Of the 6 sent out, only 2 returned. The team leader, case officer, and strike force operative. All traces of the mission were covered to the best of the division's ability, and the case was sidelined until the year 20, when the masquerade protocol was lifted, and the Directorate determined a quick acquisition of certain materials from the catacombs was warranted. After this operation, see Project Carafe, the ruin was sealed from the 2nd floor with proprietary AE barriers and deterrents. Then, all entrances to the tomb, and indeed the entire 1st floor, were caved in with explosives. As of December 20, no effort to reopen the case by the division has been pursued, and no effort to breach the sealed ruin by national opponents or lone actors has been observed. Research Journal 1-1, Case Officer. Entry into Turkey and the subsequent trip went very smoothly, considering the current relations between us and Erdogan. That isn't too surprising, but it is nonetheless a relief. It helps that all of us know a whole lot about archaeology. Even the Strike Force guys have a working knowledge of the Seljuk Empire from their time working on AEI missions for Project. The people at Customs barely even know what we were talking about. I love it when people don't know history. It makes it so easy to get them to stop listening. Assuming we aren't being tailed, we should be able to divert for the Karapanar Desert by tomorrow. All we have to do is leave our phones at the hotel, and the people from the embassy will carry them to the mountains. As far as anyone is concerned, we'll be doing exactly what we said we'd be doing. Of course, that only works if no one is literally watching us, but I doubt it. We're already in the boonies, and I haven't seen anyone wearing a suit for 100 miles.
Research Journal 1-2.
Professor's journal was right on the money. I was a bit surprised, considering how many pages were missing. I figured he would have torn out any of the specifics, but I guess not. It's not like he was an intelligence, so he could have just forgotten, though it's equally likely he removed the other pages for some other reason than to prevent people from finding the tombs. Maybe it was the trauma. That's often the case with people obsessed with AEIs. As soon as they find one of the real working systems, they just want to forget. It's also possible there was some info hazard he found down there and copied into his journal. There's no real way to know, but I'm sure we'll have a better idea of his motivations once we start seeing the things he saw. On that note, we have no choice but to set up our base camp in the ruins themselves. Preliminary readings don't show any unseen dangers other than your usual dust inhalation, but, well, that's only worth so much. There just isn't any cover above this place. It's essentially just a hole in the ground surrounded by flat desert. It would have taken us years to find this place if we didn't have the journals, but that's all the more reason to make sure we aren't found out. We'd stand out like sore thumbs putting up tents in the Karapanar. I'm pretty sure anyone that sees that would assume we need to be rescued. There's absolutely nothing alive here for miles. The ruins are pretty well built, unusually so for the time period. It must have taken a significant amount of manpower to get this done in 1500 BC. Doubly so if the journal is right about how deep it goes. The fact that there's no other accounts of this place is wild. It must really be the case that they tried to forget. Considering that, we're all tiptoes and tenterhooks. If an entire group of people goes out of their way to hide something from history, it's usually for a pretty good reason. That said, Professor made it out of here, so I like our odds okay.
Research Journal 1-3.
In translating the gifs and iconography on the first level, it's clear to see that this was some sort of religious site, or rather it was. Many of the murals and writings have been completely scraped off. Normally I would assume this to be erosion, but this place is more or less untouched. No wind down here, you can still see the tool markings, and they appear to be from the Bronze Age or earlier. There's essentially no way Professor or his crew defaced this. It would be strange for them to do so as professional archaeologists, though considering the nature of their investigation, it wouldn't be terribly unexpected. Whatever these things used to say, they were removed a long time ago. Whether they were an info hazard or the people who used this place lost faith in their deity, we don't know. On that note, I have to remember to look through the databases and see if we have anything on a bat-like Sumerian demon or giant burning skeletons under a working atypical religion. I feel like I've heard something similar from another case I read, but they kind of blend together at this point. I wish I could get into the system now, as knowing what sort of extra-normal intelligence I might be dealing with could save us a lot of trouble. Even just knowing whether or not these pictures represent something real could shave down the number of dangers we expose ourselves to. No use crying over spilled milk, though. We'll just have to assume any wrong move could offend a demigod. In the course of this investigation, we basically have to put our lives in the hands of the IH Protectorate. If there's an info hazard in here, we basically have no choice but to look at it. And if the goggles don't blur it out, then we're essentially cooked. Unfortunately, there's a pretty decent chance of that happening since the IH Protectorate can only go off of info hazards that have been fed into its training data. Anything outside of its knowledge base has a pretty good shot of sneaking through. Since that's the case, we have to take turns trying to read these etchings. So far, there hasn't been as much as a single complete sentence intact, at least not as far as modern sentences go. There's been a few mentions of exalted warriors, or maybe divine warriors, but most cases have the first part of the word scratched away. If it wasn't for the fact that the scratches go against the stroke of the letter, there'd be no way to guess at it. Needless to say, if we were on guard before, we're knives out now. Just about anything an ancient group of people would consider divine will be a nightmare in reality, and anything that ancient people decided was too profane to continue worshipping, well, I can't even imagine what that might be. It's a terrifying thought. Not sure whether or not I should hope it's just an info hazard.
Research Journal 1-4.
We spent 2 days scouring the entire first floor of this place. From the scarce amount of information we could pull from the destroyed glyphs, I can only piece together that this place was a ritual site of some sort, and at some point. Something about the chosen few and exalted or divine warriors, but as to what that means and why it was all etched away, we can't be sure. There are a lot of portions of this floor that are almost completely destroyed, and that too seems to be intentional, just like the scratched out etchings. The tool markings aren't all the same. Some of it looks like it could have been more modern, and other parts look like they were smashed with a boulder. It's difficult to tell what these chambers were supposed to be before they were broken, but I have noticed that the greatest amount of damage was done to the areas with the most space. That's the most space, horizontally and vertically. Most of the place has a ceiling that's around 6 feet, which is pretty common for ruins since the average person used to be a lot shorter. The one that's completely wrecked must be about 15 feet high. We had to go down a set of steps to get in, and they were mostly destroyed as well. I can't be sure, but I'd bet dollars to donuts this place used to be a temple or a ritual room of some sort. It would certainly fit in with the idea of a disgraced object of worship, and that would match the professor's description of a tomb of condemnation rather than exaltation. On the second day, we found what we believe to be a way down to the next level, but it's closed tight. I'm not even sure an excavator could lift this thing, but it's definitely a door. No help from the professor's notes. Odds are good he kept a different notebook on how to open these ancient doors just in case his work was stolen. He might not have been an intelligence, but he was at least paranoid enough to make himself a kidnapping victim rather than a murder victim. It does, however, say that the door is trapped, and there's no shortage of other traps mentioned in the notes. I can't imagine it'll be too difficult. Arcane power or not, ancient people didn't have a good grasp on locksmithing. I'm certain it'll be incredibly dangerous, though. To that point, there are some untouched glyphs around the door. The translation, roughly, is "nothing good lies here, turn back." There's also an old piece of paper left here, definitely the same kind as in the professor's notebooks. It just says "don't open." Obviously, we don't have a whole lot of choice in that regard. There's no way for us to know if this ancient tomb will actually be able to hold whatever kind of anomaly is down here until we learn more about it. Still, it reminds me of something I read recently. It was a discussion about how we, as a people, should handle nuclear waste. The idea is that the nuclear waste could well outlast modern society, and they were trying to come up with ways to communicate to the people of the future that there was no good reason to dig that waste up. Mostly it was pictographs of people getting radiation poisoning and vague messages about the danger still being present. But there were some ideas about hostile architecture too. Things like using spikes and other off-putting patterns and shapes to communicate the idea of danger in a way that didn't require language. I don't know if the Hittites were trying to employ that kind of thing here, but I will say this dark, musty, foreboding ruin covered in hieroglyphs of bones and battles isn't exactly inviting. Unlike us, though, we can be pretty sure the Hittites didn't know the true nature of nuclear waste. We have no reason to have faith in their efforts to contain whatever's here. The work must continue. I should really be more optimistic, though, and there's just as good a chance these idiots had no idea what they were dealing with, and whatever they tried to bury could be a massive boon to the agency. Anything that could put us above the Russians would be a help, considering the normal agency divisions are crawling with them. Not just the CIA, Congress is full of pink-skinned old men who wouldn't mind trading national secrets for one night with a girl named Katyusha. Even the White House. I shouldn't write that down, even if everyone already knows. I'll get back to trying to open this ancient trap door.
Research Journal 1-5.
I'm not sure the professor was right about this place being built by the Hittites. There's nothing in the Dead Sea Scrolls or any other historical records that say they were this good at machining. It took us the better part of a day to figure out how the door worked, and even then we didn't manage to get it open without setting off the trap. Luckily, it only hit one of the Strike Force guys, and he managed to survive the stone pillar that slammed into his chest. I don't know if he's got AEI protection or if you guys gave him some sort of drug, but that was clearly more force than a regular person should be able to take. I asked him about it, but he wouldn't tell me. Now that I think about it, I'm not even sure what his name is, though I heard the other guys calling him. Regardless, the door wasn't half as simple as I thought it would be. There shouldn't have been this level of technology at that point in history. I'm certain if this belonged to the Hittites, they would have used at least some of that sophistication to take an unfair advantage in warfare and trade. I suppose it could have been some offshoot, but I have a feeling this is a ruin for a completely different society we haven't encountered before, and whoever they were, they seem to have gone down with the ship. The second floor is littered with traps, but they seem to be aimed the wrong way. That is to say, we've been able to see the mechanisms before we run into them. Maybe they didn't expect people to be able to see this well inside a dark tomb, but I have a feeling they're just not meant for the people coming inside. Rather, they seem like they're meant to trap something coming from the inside. I'd say that isn't a good sign, but it might mean the threat here is mostly physical, which would be a welcome relief. Both the strike force and the research team are equipped with anachronistic weaponry and various AE induction implements. Each one of us should be able to disable a few M1 Abrams tanks all on our own. A monster in the dark shouldn't pose too much of a problem, as long as we can see it coming. And it doesn't have some sort of extra normal power we aren't prepared for, which, now that I think about it, seems more likely than I've given it credit. Yeah, we'll have to keep our eyes peeled. Luckily, nothing on the floor seems to be alive. It's just a series of small chambers with large stone tablets, each with one or two odd-looking statues on them. All of them appear to be approximations of human skeletons, with a few exceptions. Obviously, there isn't much space between the bones, as a sculpture like that would be well beyond an ancient civilization like this. At least one that would be able to stay together after thousands of years. On top of that, some of the bones are visibly different from a person's, especially the skull, the collarbones, the elbows, and fingers. All of them are spiked. The head doesn't exactly have horns, but it looks like it's on its way. Plus, the teeth are a bit sharper. Each of the statues are unique, though only in minute ways. Different heights, different approximate shapes, but they all follow the same design, and each of them is built on the stone tablet along with stone arches made to look like manacles or straps, like the statues have been captured or are undergoing some kind of surgical procedure. Not sure exactly what they're made of, but it's a grainy white stone of some kind. Doesn't look particularly hard, but geology isn't my thing, so I could be wrong. Obviously, I'm not going to touch these things unless I have to. For all I know, they might come to life the second I go to take a sample. There hasn't been any sign of that, and our life form detection hasn't picked up anything, so it isn't very likely, but I know better than to take that as read.
Research log 1-6.
We've been wandering through a hall of stone tablets for days. It looks like they expected to make a lot more of these statues, but either stopped or never got around to it. Some of the stone tablets were busted up, similarly to the altar room or whatever it was upstairs, but most everything else is completely intact. That said, the walls aren't nearly as ornate as the first level. It's essentially just a cave down here, or maybe a quarry. There's still some glyphs though, but only on the tablets. I don't recognize a lot of these characters, but they appear to be similar to, or maybe based on, characters from Cuneiform or Anatolian hieroglyphs. I feel like they can't be stylistic changes, though, as the words don't match together as they appear. They'll say something like, man of the sea, or dirt god, and neither of those have any kind of crossover, as far as I know. I suppose they could be names, but it doesn't follow the normal conventions. Normally, they would represent a place, or one of the demon gods of their culture, but there's no such thing as a dirt god. There isn't even a dirt god in Sumerian demon mythology. There's earth gods, but not dirt gods. I don't know how important this is, but it was strange enough for me to take note of it. I think we've found the way down to the next level, but this door looks even more serious than the last one. Most of the construction has been stone, cord, and wood, but this thing is covered in bronze. We can only assume this will be a heightened layer of security, which means our strike force members might not end up limping away from this one if we mess it up. The rest of the research team wants to take the risk of using AC to figure it out. Even the AC competent of the team seems to be up for it, and the sensors haven't picked up anything in the way of waves or atypical fields, so it probably won't be dangerous. Still, there's always a chance for a psychic to see something they shouldn't in a place like this. That goes doubly for ancient places of worship, with confirmed anomalies, too. But I suppose there's always an AC competent on a team for a reason. We don't know if there's any danger to the psyche here, but we know firsthand that there's physical dangers around every corner.
Research log 1-7.
We are right to be worried about this door, or rather this series of doors. It ended up being 3 interconnected layers, all trapped, one with an AE invocation and built like a damn puzzle box. It's a good thing we decided to try divining it beforehand. The only way to get through without activating a trap was to go back through the second door and close it after getting to the third. Ridiculous. I don't know how in the world Professor and his team got through this thing. His notes mentioned bringing an expert in ancient machinery, but this should have been well beyond the average Tomb Raider's expertise. Maybe one of his guys got killed here and he just didn't mention it in the diary. I suppose it wouldn't be good tact to make a paper trail for getting someone killed on an expedition, but I don't know. Maybe Professor was deeper into the darkness than we realized. Maybe he was an AC competent himself. It would certainly explain how he managed to guess where this place was. We've only taken a few steps into this floor. The place is riddled with booby traps and curses. It's gonna be slow going from here, but that's fine with me. It's much darker on this floor. The air smells different too, but more than that, there's just this dread hanging in the chamber. I'm not sure what's waiting for us, but there's no way it'll be safe to just stroll around.
Research log 1-8.
We found something strange. It raises a lot more questions than it answers, but it does at least explain the smell down here. A few turns in, and maybe a dozen traps deep, there's this series of chambers. All of them are more or less the same. Each one has a steep slant on one side and straight walls along all the others, all of which are covered in some sort of grease. I don't know what this grease is, or how the Hittites or whoever managed to make it. It's definitely ancient, but I don't know how they managed to make it last this long. Normally grease of any kind, especially organic grease, would degrade or dry out, but this stuff seems like it's just as slippery as it was when they put it here. Research team member nearly fell all the way down. Managed to just fall on his ass since we were already moving so slowly. That's another thing, there's no light in here at all. There's not even places to hang torches or lanterns. And on top of that, you can't see the bottom on the slant in any of the chambers. It goes down for a long time. We haven't reached the end, but so far there's been around half a dozen of these places. I've decided to call this one the oubliette. It's just about the only reasonable use I can find for the design of these rooms. There clearly isn't any manufacturing purpose for them, and it really doesn't feel like a religious thing, though I suppose it's possible. Just based on the warning on the door and all the statues of chained down skeletons, I assume they built this level to keep someone or something from getting out. I can only assume they made it a steep slant rather than a pit so they could allow whoever they pushed to the bottom the hope that they could eventually climb out. It wouldn't make sense that the same people who made that door wouldn't be able to grease the walls of a simple pit. Unless they built it afterwards, perhaps. I don't know. It's a mystery still, but I'm fairly sure this is supposed to be some form of torture or containment, or both. Our lights don't reach the bottom, and neither do our ropes. The lifeform detection system didn't pick anything up from the bottom, though, so we can be pretty sure there's nothing still alive down there. That said, there is some noise. It's faint, so much that we only noticed it after checking the audio recordings. Can't really be sure of what it is. Some kind of thumping, like stone shifting around. Potentially some other archaic mechanism, though what it could ever be for, I have no idea. Maybe after we're done here, we can send for more equipment. I'd be really curious to see what's at the bottom of these pits. It's probably a tough ask, considering our relations with Turkey, but stranger things have happened.
Research log 1-9.
We've come to a dead end, and it seems like there's no way around it. According to the professor's notebooks, there should be at least 3 more levels, but the passageway that must lead to the next door is caved in. It's hard to be sure without digging it out, but I can't imagine this is an accident. There's no visible tool marks and no fuses left behind, but it just seems too impossible for the construction of this place to be flimsy enough to fail on its own after all we've seen. I think it's safe to assume that the professor blew the passageway. It's remarkable there was no sign of weakening on the higher floors, though. I suppose the separation between the levels is pretty thick. These catacombs go deep into the earth, way deeper than any other Bronze Age construction I've seen. Even then, I would have expected something to shake loose. Anyway, we're going to start trying to pick through it. Our sensors ought to be able to tell us if the structure's getting weaker, and we're still not getting any signs of life, so there shouldn't be any reason not to continue. It's not exactly a popular decision, especially among the security team, but we're already here, and we're meant to determine what sort of anomaly is in this tomb. Leaving now would be giving up on our duties.
Research Log 1-10.
We've picked away a decent amount of rubble from the collapsed passage. We started throwing the rubble down into the oubliettes in the previous rooms. The first few loads were a bit suspenseful, but nothing came of it. Still no readings, still no signs of life. And the sounds coming from down in the pits have only changed a little bit. Just a little extra crunch in the thumping. Maybe some of the rubble is getting caught in a mechanism down there. Can't really say. Might just be me hearing things. More importantly, we finally found something else from Professor's expedition. A few things, actually. For one, there was a bag of fuses and some shrapnel from TNT sticks. The old school kind. When we saw the cardboard tube, all of us froze, obviously. That stuff gets more volatile the longer it's left. But it seems like all of it's blown already, and the sensors aren't smelling any more nitro in the area. There were also pieces of broken mason jar and some inky black substance that was probably inside it. The sensors don't recognize it, so we have to assume it's some kind of hazardous material. Because of that, the digging has to stop for the day, which is a shame, because the chamber floor was starting to look like it was leading up to a door. Could be a few meters or a few inches away from the next layer, but protocol's protocol.
Research Journal 1-11.
This stuff is definitely not normal. If our equipment isn't malfunctioning, then this ink doesn't match any chemical signature on Earth. It would basically mean it doesn't even have the same molecular structures as other known substances. Essentially, it can't exist under the laws of physics as we know them. It's a chemical based on a different form of chemistry. That's if our equipment is working, anyway. The stuff we get from R&D can be a bit finicky, especially when it's cutting edge. Still, I have a feeling we've found our anomaly, or at least a part of it. No idea how this fits in with the altar or the oubliettes, but it's definitely weird.
Research Journal 1-12.
We were about to keep digging when we heard a noise coming from deeper in the chamber, on the other side of the rubble. Obviously, we waited and watched for a good long time to see what would happen. And what happened was a voice called out to us. It sounded like a man, human. He was speaking English with a Turkish accent. Said he was a local that had gotten trapped down here a week ago, and he was about to run out of food. Voice full of emotion and desperation. Pretty convincing. But it was barking up the wrong tree. Even if we believed that, it isn't our job to save anyone. In fact, we would have had to kill him. That isn't what we did, though. It doesn't make sense that a local would get trapped in this tomb. The locals don't even know about this place, and the closest settlement is miles away. More than that, the voice didn't sound quite right. There wasn't anything inhuman about it, but the word choice was off. It wasn't modern. The accent was perfect, the voice was perfect, but the vocabulary was antiquated and non-localized. Probably British, I'd guess, and that would fit in with the team that Professor brought with him on his expedition. Obviously, someone from that expedition shouldn't still be alive if they were trapped in here. They shouldn't even be able to breathe unless there are other ventilation shafts we haven't found. In an abundance of caution, we didn't respond. Even when we were holding completely still, it kept talking, like it knew we were there. After a while, I figured we should leave the sensor behind to make sure there aren't any AP or AEI effects in the voice itself. There weren't, but the voice didn't talk much at all while we stepped away. After we came back, it continued on with the act. Eventually, we decided to talk to it. We played along, acted like we were tomb raiders that were afraid to be discovered by the authorities, but it figured out we didn't believe it pretty quickly. Somehow, it determined we must have the professor's notebook. I'd say I don't know how it came to that conclusion when we'd barely said anything, but it only makes sense. But it only makes sense in retrospect. The professor was the first to discover this place, and he kept those secrets until he died. When we confirmed that to be the case, it chuckled for a bit, and then started speaking in a British accent. It said he was Dr. one of the professor's old friends, and part of the original exploration of this place. I'd read a decent amount about him from the professor's dossier, and the details matched up. It was strange that there wasn't much about him in the notebook, though. I suppose the notebook was primarily focused on the tomb, but it still struck me as odd. We asked him how he managed to stay alive all this time, and he said they found a substance in this ruin. A substance that could make someone immortal. He assumed we wouldn't believe him, or maybe he just acted like he thought we wouldn't. He spoke very eloquently, an air of calculation. always pausing to think before answering or continuing the conversation. I asked about what happened on the expedition, why so many pages might have been left out of the professor's notes. In hindsight, it might have been a mistake to reveal our hand like that, but I was curious, and having a mountain of rubble between us made me feel more self-assured. He told us all about discovering the ruins, trying to suss out the etched-out glyphs on the first floor. Then he talked about losing their local guide to the cursed door on the second level, and one of their friends to another trap near the oubliettes. His voice was racked with emotion, like all of this had just happened yesterday. It struck me as strange, as this would have been decades ago. Frankly, it was strange he was still so put together after living in the dark all this time. I didn't bring that up, though, of course. He continued on, talking about the lower floors and the writings there. They warned against using the ichor of the god of pain, and said no good would come of this power. The Hittites, or whatever civilization built this place, found it seeping out of a burial stone that sank deep into the earth after their priests prayed to a god with no name. The oil from the stone made the warriors effectively unkillable, at least in the Bronze Age. He talked about how the professor got spooked and decided on his own that they shouldn't disturb it any further. Dr. disagreed and continued, and after finding the substance and experimenting with it, the professor closed him and the others in. The others died instantly, and he was left unable to die. Or at least that's what he said. I noted that he didn't mention the statues, or what we believed to be an altar on the first floor, or the oubliettes. It struck me as odd that such a detailed story would leave out some of the biggest mysteries we'd encountered so far. More than that, he would insert asides, subtly, very subtly, that we should help him and that everything beyond that point was interesting, powerful, or priceless. Frankly, it was masterfully done. It was even starting to convince us. It seemed like we could use this substance, and even the doctor himself could be an enormous asset. It stands to reason that he was probably practicing this speech for decades. We were considering whether or not to keep digging when I decided to check on the sensors again. I'd only looked at the sensors, so I figured I should see if there were any other atypical waveforms. I hadn't even considered looking at the lifeform detection system. We were talking to someone who had all the memories and knowledge of a person we knew about. There wasn't really any reason to, but the lifeform detector didn't pick anything up. I thought it might be a fluke, but it still worked on the security team too. Whatever was on the other side of the rubble wasn't alive, at least not in the way that we are. That made me think. We didn't find any life forms at the bottom of those pits either. Maybe those noises weren't machines at all, but other people. People who'd been exposed to this substance thousands of years ago and then left in the dark. I showed the others the readings and started cooking up a story about needing to go for help. It was expertly done, a textbook deception, but the doctor, or whatever it was, didn't buy it. It just went silent. Even when we tried to engage it again, it didn't answer. After a while, we started to hear rocks scraping around on the other side. Probably whatever it was trying to clear the rubble away. There's no way to know if it could actually make any progress, as we don't know what the other side of the chamber looks like. Presumably, it shouldn't be able to dig its way out, or it would have done so already. My guess is it's pinned down by some of the rubble. It's also possible it just couldn't see well enough to know which way to dig, and that would mean us showing up gave it a new direction for its efforts. Luckily, we shouldn't have to go down any further. At least not for now. The substance it was describing is almost certainly that black ink we'd already found. If that stuff is the source of the anomaly, then we've accomplished our mission. The only issue is that jar was shattered. The sample we found was splashed all over the rocks, and we only found it by moving the rubble out of the way. There's a non-zero chance one of us has already been exposed to it. I'm gonna try and play it cool. There's no telling what this stuff actually does. There's no guarantee what sets it off. Best to keep it to myself and see what happens.
Research Journal 1-13.
I've kept the team looking around the third floor under the impression of finding more information about the black substance while I continue to test it. In truth, I've done all the tests I can, and we're already pretty sure there's nothing left to find.
but I needed an excuse to keep the team down here until we figure out if we need to be quarantined. So far, no one's raised any concerns, and no one's acting strangely. Research Journal 1-14. The Strike Force guy. I think his name is... His life form reading has been getting progressively weaker. I think he's breathing slower, too. Or maybe it's just that he isn't breathing as much. No one else seems to have been affected. I need to find a way to separate him from the rest of us. Research Journal 1-15. The rest of the research team is dead. So is one of the Strike Force. Spotted a patch of white on the affected guy's skin. Idiots started yelling about it immediately. Before we could even do anything, he started shooting. It's like he knew we would be found out, and he knew we would try to leave him behind until we could get a quarantine team in here. I don't know if he was always that smart. It didn't seem like it when we were on our way in. It's like he turned into a cornered tiger. We tried everything on him, but nothing worked. Bullets, AEIs, explosives, nothing. He's invincible, and it seems like he's getting stronger. Me and managed to get away and hide on the second floor among the statues. But now he's between us and the exit. Research Journal 1-16. We barely managed to get out. It took hours of sneaking around in the dark. But we got around him, managed to close him in on the second floor. My leg's broken. Has a concussion, and one of his eyes was injured. This guy... He wasn't human anymore. His bones were coming out. It looked like he was made of stone. We had to leave the sample. Just about everything else. I don't know how the hell we're getting out of this desert, much less the country. One thing's for sure, though. Those weren't statues tied down to those slabs. They're just holding still. FOI is written and produced by me, Kit Curtis. The theme song, A Special Kind of Hell, was produced by Beware the Patternmind, whose music is available wherever good music is played. This month's episode was titled The Catacombs, and it's based off a lucid nightmare I once had of an invincible British man. If you like this show and want to hear more of it, play it into the ears of your loved ones when they sleep at night. Thank you for listening.